Hi everyone, and welcome to our final ITSM crowd for 2022, and what a year it has been. We're going to talk about the Global SIAM survey in this episode. So I'm joined by Michelle Major Goldsmith and Simon Dorst from our survey sponsors Kinetic IT, and we're also going to have a little recap of 2022, what's been brilliant, what's not been so much fun, and we might even gaze into our crystal balls and have a look at what we think is going to happen next year. Although with what's happened in the last few years, I'm not sure any of us feel confident about predictions anymore, but we'll start with some introductions. So Simon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. For those of you that don't know me, my moniker on Twitter is the Idle Zealot. Been in the service management industry for about that long, longer than I care to remember. And in light of the topic today, about 6-7 years ago, the zealotness kind of dropped off, and we're looking at other things, service management. There's more to this world, and so we came and stumbled across SIAM, Verism, the concept of agile, and all kinds of other things. So definitely, it's a whole wide world of service management that I move in these days. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. And Michelle.
I always like to say and get Simon to go first so I can say what he said. So, yeah, fairly ancient in the service management world, and like Simon, invested in service management best practices in all of their forms. So we worked with Claire on the SIAM bodies of knowledge and the Verisum publications, and very excited about anything at all that can help people to do their jobs better. So yeah, keen to chat today about the survey and the future, and just sort of come together and see if we can consolidate on that sort of crystal ball gazing.
Fantastic, thank you. So Michelle and Simon both joining us from Australia, so really grateful to them for coming in at the end of their day. And I am noticing, I don't know if it's my lighting, but I look a lot paler than you in our UK winter. So spray tans next time, I think. My name's Claire Agater. I'm going to be the host for today's session. If you've got any questions that you want to ask Michelle and Simon, or if you've got any comments that you want to put to us, if you've read the SIAM survey, you've got some thoughts that you want to share, pop them into the YouTube comments, and we can bring them up on screen. More than happy to hear from you and pick them up during the call. So please don't be shy. Just a little bit of background about the survey itself. So SIAM, Service Integration and Management, is a growing area of IT management methodology, really helping people to establish service management across environments where they've got more than one service provider, they've got external suppliers, internal teams. How do we knit everything together to create an end-to-end service? And Scopism launched the survey in 2018, and what's been happening each year is we've been surveying people from all over the world to say, what are your experiences of SIAM? Are you planning to do it? Have you done it? Are you an organisation that's selling SIAM services, our consultancy, our software? And we've started to build up these trends, really, which are published in a white paper this year. We can't do that without having sponsorship. So we're really grateful to the companies that sponsor the survey. So For Me have been a sponsor in the past, and this year was Kinetic IT's second time sponsoring the survey as well. And it's brilliant that this helps us bring the content to SIAM practitioners around the world. So I guess one of the first things to think about is, was there anything in the survey this year that surprised you? And Michelle, I'll come to you first.
There was lots that surprised me, but I think if we start at the beginning of the survey, so there's a section really on the demographics, and there's a couple of things there that have shown a shift, which I think is something that's quite exciting. The first one was around I guess looking at the kind of people that are in the industry. So that was based on their age, and also how they identify. So there was when I talk about age, first of all, I think historically SIAM has been an industry that has really had sort of tenured personnel. So you tend to get that older age group of people, and that's because it needs experience to be able to do it well, and so that sort of makes sense. And there's been a really interesting shift. So whilst it still is the case that older people are largely forming the basis of SIAM personnel, what was quite interesting this year for the first time is that sort of younger age group moving into SIAM and identifying with that as a position that they were in within their organisation. So I like to think that tells us that younger people are sort of saying, hey, this looks like it could be a really good career move, and it looks like SIAM's going to be the future, if you like. So that's the way I'd like to think about it. The second key thing for me as well was the fact that there was more women who had sort of said, yes, we're working in the SIAM industry. So we know IT generally is a male-dominated industry, and that absolutely hasn't changed. But what has changed is that there were more women than ever before saying that they were working in the SIAM space. So they were two things for me, even before we go into the details of the survey and in terms of the SIAM models, that were around the demographics, which I thought were really, really interesting and not just interesting, but I felt quite hopeful about those
Yes.
from a future point of view.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it shows probably, more than ever, the fact that we need to start thinking about career paths into SIAM, and how do people find SIAM? How do they progress in their career? And I think we'll maybe come to that when we talk about the training elements as well. Simon, anything that surprised you?
Not so much surprised, but I think the thing about having this survey now for 5 years, you can start seeing some trends, and the nice one. So it wasn't a surprise, but it was good to see that trend is that over the 5 years, the strategic objectives and the benefits seems to shift a little bit from SIAM as a supplier contract framework into collaborative benefits and a realization, which you then see with the challenges, and we may talk about them in a little bit more detail, around the organizational change that is required when working in a more SIAM in that collaborative way in there. So that was kind of nice, because it's something that we've been saying for a long time, that it's not a contract structure that makes it SIAM. It's about getting the best of your service providers working together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things in the the initial section that I always notice it, and this year it was 73% of organisations that we surveyed this year had more than 1,000 employees, and this is something that has been reflected across the 5 years we've been doing the survey. Do you do you think SIAM is really only applicable to large organisations, or is there a way for smaller organisations to see the benefits of SIAM?
This is a question we get asked all the time because of that kind of data, but experience tells us that if you're working in an organisation where you've got a number of service providers, it doesn't matter how big or small that organisation is, you are going to get some benefit. So all of the principles will apply in those situations. Of course, the more complex you get and the more providers you get, you are going to get, I guess, more of the benefits in there. So it isn't just the bigger organizations. It isn't just having lots and lots of service providers. It isn't just about, these big multinational organizations. We certainly have seen experience with customers here in Australia that are smaller organizations and absolutely are getting the benefits. They're very transferable. That's my view.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's a bit of history repeating, because originally it's normally large organizations that are looking for formality and grabbing hold of a methodology like SIAM or ITIL before. And I remember the conversations in the past, like, how many process managers do you need, and what if you only have 15 people in your IT department?
Yeah.
It is about the concepts and the principles and how you can apply them probably in a less formal way in smaller organizations in there. And I always like to say, like, a lot of the SIAM concepts are about management capabilities. They're about integrating individuals, whether they're individual service providers or individual staff members, that each have their skills and their agendas, and getting the best out of them. Or the sports analogy is good as well. So yes, SIAM concepts are applicable in any organization, and I'm sure we'll come back when we talk about the future later today, about the unconscious need that we see in the market for service management concepts, and SIAM ones in particular. So definitely.
And you mentioned the organizational drivers for SIAM as well, Simon. Talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing there in terms of what is the business case for SIAM.
So the original business case is the fact that there are multiple service providers, and that is hard to handle. So people tend to focus on external service providers, on contractual difficulties, on reporting gaps between different providers, for not seeing the wood for the trees. And that is, of course, still one of the key drivers to say, okay, we need to do something about these service integration concepts. But more and more now we start talking in general, not so much about outputs, but outcomes and value and experiences. We see the fact that we need these service providers to work together. So it doesn't matter how good the contract is. We need them to kind of work together and contribute to the larger thing in there. And that's also where SIAM provides some structures, some things, but a culture around it. And we see that in some organizations. So one of our customer is, I think it's 90+% in-source. So these are all internal teams in there. And we started talking to them about the SIAM concepts, not from a contractual point of view, but from a culture, from a one team perspective, in how do we get all these different teams in different locations to work together within the organization. And that's nice to see, because that's what we've always thought SIAM should be. It's about collaboration, not about contracts.
Absolutely. And just a reminder for those people that are watching us live, if you've got any questions you want to ask Simon and Michelle, by all means, please do put them into the YouTube chat. And if you've got any comments on this year's white paper, it's a free download on scopism.com. Pop those in as well. We'd love to hear from you. And Michelle, you mentioned SIAM challenges a little bit early on. Talk to us a little bit about what we see and the trends there. Are the SIAM challenges mainly the same? Do they change year by year?
I think what's interesting is that they stay roughly the same, but the order in which of importance, I guess differs. So, you know, in the early years of the survey, what we saw was people were deciding to move to a SIAM model in the hope of getting benefits, which would mean that their service providers, I guess, were more in line, were more delivering their obligations, were more able to be conformant to their contractual commitments. And it was all that sort of kind of rigor and structure around controlling those service providers better. And I think that's quite interesting. Now it's more about, and Simon alluded to it before, trying to overcome the challenges of getting the providers to work better together in a more cohesive fashion. So less about the stick, and more about sort of getting that one team culture to work better. So that's quite interesting. I think one of the things that's also really quite interesting across the piece when we look at the survey, and for those that are not aware, the survey is broken down into 3 chunks. So your first chunk is organisations who are thinking about implementing SIAM. The second is organisations who have implemented, and the third is service provider organisations who sell those SIAM services. And across the piece this year, what we've seen is that the main challenge for every organisation has been that organizational change management piece, that real focus on, how do we ensure that people understand that whilst, this is about a technology change and, a process change or a process integration, ostensibly it can't work well without the people and getting the people along for the journey. So in each of those categories, people thinking about SIAM, people doing about SIAM, or people doing SIAM and people selling SIAM, that was the main challenge right away across the piece. So it wasn't about challenges establishing service integration. It wasn't about governance frameworks. It wasn't about process coordination, which it has been in the past. They were up there, but the main one, heavily recognizable, was this organizational change management activity, and having enough resources and scope and focus on ensuring that that was a major piece of the jigsaw.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not unique to SIAM, is it? It's every single thing that we do, every project, every change that we do. It's the OCM piece that quite often is the big big sticking point. One other thing that I wanted to pick up on with you is the idea of enterprise SIAM. So extending SIAM outside the IT department into other areas of the organization. And this is something that when I talk to people who are working in the SIAM space, they're very interested in. They see it as the kind of the evolution of SIAM and a natural part of a shift to a sort of a more workflow based approach to what we do. But when we do the survey and we ask people, are you using SIAM outside of IT? The answer that we get back is a fairly resounding no, unfortunately. Is this something that you see changing with your customers? Are you seeing any developments there? Or do you think it will be that SIAM remains confined within the IT department?
I think it will remain relatively confined for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, because I agree, it's nothing is IT about it as such in there, but it does seem to be very hard in organizations to kind of get to talk to the people at a sufficient level. IT doesn't kind of manage the organization, so we're not selling, advocating service integration principles to the right people, to put it hardly in there. So yeah, we get IT organizations coming to us or talking to us about SIAM and new concepts. You might get an occasional HR and finance areas which are very workflow orientated, which is where the tooling options normally go to as well. So they're using a service management tool. They are probably more likely to use service management and SIAM concepts in there. But to really get it into the business as a whole, enterprise SIAM or enterprise service management is unfortunately, I think, not high on the agenda of most organizations.
I was going to add there, doing the crystal ball gazing. I'm sure we had a conversation a few years ago about this, and the survey told us that there was an interest in sort of extending SIAM into non-IT areas, and part of me sort of thinks, is that still an aspiration? Is it just the challenges of the last few years globally has meant for many organisations that they've been in either steady state or certainly not necessarily massively moving forward. So maybe as we get, assuming that things sort of improve globally, if we get into next year and things are slightly better, will there be a move to start to think about how SIAM can be used in other areas, much like the aspiration of a few years ago? So I'm hopeful that might change. I'm thinking that maybe it was just a sign of the times that has stunted the growth somewhat. But yeah, who will know? Who knows?
We've got a comment here from David. Hi, David. That for him, the core of SIAM is that one team culture, which is part of a strategy and should be an enterprise approach. And yeah, absolutely agree with that, David. Michelle, Simon, any thoughts?
No, I think we're talking to the wrong people here. We all agree on that it's a great idea, and yeah, maybe it is a sign of the times that it's not high on the priorities, and we're not getting quite to the right people. Some small successes here and there, which should be celebrated, but yeah, I can't see it becoming mainstream as much as we want it to be.
But with regard to David's comment, I mean, it's spot on, really. That one team culture part is absolutely what it's all about, but it's about getting that understanding and that investment and having the commitment to make sure that everybody feels the same way within your SIAM system, and our experience tells us that that isn't necessarily always the case. There can be that sort of them and us situation. So it's a good point, and it's absolutely spot on. It's just achieving that can be a bit more challenging, I guess.
And then the last thing I wanted to touch on from the survey is the training questions, because we started asking these, I think, 3 years ago, just trying to get a sense of how much investment organisations were making in educating their staff, whether that's in formal training and awareness programs, or whether it's more formal training in things like SIAM Foundation and SIAM Professional. The positive thing is that we do see an increase year on year in the number of organisations that are saying that they're investing in training. But what did you think of this year's results?
I'm happy to go. So I think I was, again, similarly to you, happy to see that every year it just gets better and better with a greater investment in training. And one of the things we know from experience, when we work with our customers or we're delivering a training course, without question, the feedback is always, oh my goodness, I wish my customer, my boss would come on this training. So I think it's massively important and insightful or gives the opportunity to provide that insight, and it's really, really worthwhile. We would say that because obviously we're delivering training, but the experience backs that up. It absolutely does. I think there's still that sort of misnomer about the distinction between service management and SIAM, and I think when we get people into a room and talk about how SIAM is different and the kind of things that you need to do to foster that SIAM ecosystem and the sort of leadership challenges and the organizational challenges, you get this sort of light switch on moment from lots and lots of people that goes, oh, okay, I didn't realize that that's what it was all about. So yes, I'm happy that we get more and more people through training, and it's definitely worthwhile in terms of getting people to understand what SIAM is all about.
Yeah, I'd say it's always a double-edged sword. I'm happy to see more people. We also see people specifically asking or looking for SIAM training. So there's an absolute recognition in SIAM as a different, independent way of working in there, and the bodies of knowledge as kind of the authoritative documentation and syllabus for that. So that's good. That's fantastic. But yeah, the feedback of I wish my boss, colleague, whatever should have gone to this still shows that it's only the lucky few that kind of get to go to SIAM training, where it probably would be or should be a bigger part of that OCM that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Anything else you want to say about the survey before we do a quick recap of this year?
One final point, and it's a conversation that I know, Claire, you get involved with a lot. Lots of people talk to us about SIAM and other practices like Agile and DevOps and how it all fits in. And, I just want to really stress the point that we can make ways for all of the practices to work really effectively together, and that's super important when you're talking to lots of different service providers who are doing things in lots of different ways. I think sometimes people think about SIAM and governance and think that there's rigidity there, and there is necessary controls, but it does work effectively with lots and lots of different providers doing lots of different things. So those frameworks and practices work really, really well, and we see that investment within the survey. There was organisations saying, yes, we're doing SIAM and we're doing Agile and we're doing DevOps and we're doing Verism and we're doing all these other things, and it works really well. So I just wanted to stress that point, that the evidence is out there and experience tells us that it works really well as well.
Simon, anything you want to add?
No, just what she said. Sorry that way.
I need to put you on the other side of the screen, I think. This is very surreal with the people walking across behind you. So 2022, we're not back to normal yet, although I think we're getting somewhere back to normal. What's been the highlights of this year for you both?
We are getting slowly back to normal. So for Australia, definitely was the year that we opened up again, which on a personal level meant that I got to visit some family and relatives. So that was a good thing. To me, I'm not sure if it's the year, but it's definitely confirmed the recognition of SIAM as a professional capability and the need for it. So more organizations are asking for it, which is really good. It allowed us to further extend. So certainly thought it was nice to present at Service North on the SIAM archetypes, which is a great way of starting to work with SIAM for organizations that are kind of new to it or looking into it in there. And it was also wonderful to actually have a proper conference towards the end of the year and actually see people in space as well. So yeah, it is a transition in that regard. Never say return to normal because things won't be the same, but it's certainly kind of back to business after kind of a few years of doing the absolute necessary things only. And I'm hopeful it will see, if we are looking forward, a further increase in the use of SIAM as one of the things that keep an organization working.
Michelle, how about you?
So as much as I alluded to the fact that some people still don't know what SIAM is, we have seen some really positive moves with some of our customers this year in the recognition of SIAM as not below the waterline, not just operational process, service management delivery, but more about that service integrator as a as a partner. And we're talking a lot about the role of service influence, influencing customers in their decision making, walking side by side with customers and helping them to shape their businesses or their IT strategies and the way that they move and evolve. So that's a positive. I guess on one side we've got still people learning, on the other side we've got people really sort of elevating and SIAM being elevated into the position that it should be, which is all about this stewardship and really, helping the organization to move forward. So that to me has been a real positive for this year on a practical point of view and working with customers.
Yeah, I would agree. And it has been nice to get back to some of the face-to-face events, but equally, I think there's huge positives in the virtual events as well, and the sort of the global conversation that they can open up, and I'd like to see them continue. So very briefly, dusting off the old crystal ball, what's going to happen next year? Any trends that you see in any hot topics? Anything that you'd like to happen?
Oh, lots of things, but if we stick to SIAM as a thing in there, I would expect certainly in Australia further confirmation of it as a genuine skill capability. So more organisations looking for a more formal SIAM, together with what we said, that recognition of the organisational culture aspect around it, looking for true value rather than a contract framework. I definitely see that increasing. I'm not sure to which level. I'm quite interested in what I talked before, the unconscious need in there, because ultimately the concept of integrating different providers into an outcome is universal. And so there are lots of organizations out there that do not know what SIAM is, are not thinking about SIAM, but are having issues that require, I'm not saying a SIAM solution because that's too simplistic, but application of some of the SIAM concepts. So I'm hoping that with the first thing that I said, a further formalization of it, we can also start reaching into, and whether it's enterprise SIAM or smaller organizations or just organizations that haven't been around to looking at it. So yeah, I think it's a bright future for SIAM in that regard.
Thank you. And Michelle, what about you?
Two things really. So on the one side, I guess, we mentioned the SIAM archetypes, and that was some work that we did to try and make SIAM more accessible. So I think we want to open up SIAM to those that are thinking about it but think that it might be too hard. On the other side, I think, want to see more and more of organizations who are recognizing the broader benefits that SIAM can bring to their environment, and this concept of influence and working directly with the customer as a partner rather than just managing end-to-end service delivery.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We do have our first 2023 ITSM crowd scheduled. We're going to be joined by Ray Knight and Paul Drayton on the 10th of January to talk about sustainability as standard and what organisations are now doing in that service provider space to build in environmental considerations and green IT into what they're doing. So really nice way to kick off the year, and a little bit scary as well that we'll be in January next time we speak. So huge thank you to Michelle and to Simon for joining us. To everybody who's been with us this year, have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and best wishes for next year, being happy, healthy, prosperous, and continue to join us on the ITSM crowd. Thank you, Michelle and Simon.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye.